Hey everyone, so this is game 2 of the Filthy Openings Winged Gambit series, and this is another example of a game that was played with the Winged Gambit, and this was a game played between Batur Sambiwev against Stefan Tonakanian, played in 2015. Now, this might be a bit of an unfair example, but just because that white is rated 2660 and black is rated 1930. So there is a massive difference in rating between the two players, but we'll still enjoy the game nonetheless. So white plays e4, e6, knight to f3 and d5. And white plays e5, black plays c5, and we get into our wing gambit with b4. So here black takes the pawn on b4 and accepts the gambit. Now I've said previously that I recommend that white now plays d4, and after knight c6 then play a3 to continue the game. In this game, however, white decided to play a3, but the problem with this move is it allows black to play this annoying move d4. And after a takes b4, bishop takes b4, black equalises really easily. For instance, this c3, there's d takes c3, queen a4 check and knight c6, d takes c3, black just plays bishop c5 and has equalised out the opening straight away and doesn't have any issues, whereas white's got this weak c3 pawn. And black's actually got past a pawn if it ever gets to an endgame. But in this game, after a3, black decided to play knight c6 instead. White takes on b4, and black actually plays queen c7 now, so hits this e5 pawn twice. So white defends with d4, bishop takes b4 is played with check, and white plays c3, so hitting the bishop. If the bishop drops back to a5, as we've seen previously, white should just carry on with bishop to d3. And if knight g7, just castle. And black has to be quite careful in this position. I think h6 has to be played by black. Just because if castle's here, there's actually now the Greek gift sacrifice that white can play. And this is bishop takes h7. You may have seen this a few times, but this is really dangerous for black. If the king captures this bishop, then knight g5 check can be played, and if king g8, let's say, then queen h5, and white's going to deliver a devastating attack on these two squares, h7 and f7. And if the king jumps up to g6, there's queen d3 with check, and after f5, white can play queen h3 and threaten mate on h7. So I'm not saying bishop a5 is bad, but there are better moves. Bishop e7 was played in the game, and white develops the knight. I think bishop d3 is actually the move they should play here, but they play knight to a3. Black plays a6, but this doesn't actually stop the knight, so this is another thematic situation you've got to watch out for in this opening. Sometimes the players will play a6, but this allows, anyway, white can play knight b5 because the pawn is still pinned against the rook on the a file. And now it's black who has to be a bit careful. For instance, if queen b6 here, white can play bishop g5, and the point is that this e7 bishop guards this d6 square. So if bishop takes g5, for instance, knight takes g5, the coming up next would be knight to d6, and there's no way for black to stop this. So black will be forced to play f6, white can play bishop to f4 and has a very nice game. For instance, f takes e5, knight takes e5 and knight to f6. White plays knight takes c6, queen takes, and at the end of all this there's knight c7 check winning the exchange. Rather than going for this, black decided to play it safe. Queen b8 was played, and I think the best move here for white is to actually drop the knight back to a3. And after b5 just continue normally with bishop d2, bishop d7 and bishop d3. I've seen many times black play knight to a5 in this situation, and I've just castled. They've played knight c4, I've taken, and dropped the bishop back to c2. And the problem for black is that they can never get this knight out. It's really tough to get this knight out for them, because there's bishops in the way on e7. Eventually they may have to play knight to h6, at which point you'll capture and double their h-pawns and play queen d2. And another point is that white usually tries to get their two rooks on these open files on the A and B file. So white's got a very nice game for the pawn that he's sacrificed. Back to the game though. White decided instead of playing a backwards move, they'd play knight to d6. Now, I believe this may be due to the fact that white actually outrates black by, let's say, 700 points. So maybe they want to go in for the kill. So black takes this knight off, e takes and queen takes. So white's 2 pawns down, and they play bishop to d3, but they have some very nice activity on the king side. And I think here black should play knight to e7, and after castles play h6, and they're quite safe at the moment. But in the game I feel like knight to f6, which was played, was a mistake. This allowed bishop to a3, hitting the queen, and the point is after queen c7 and castles, black's struggling to castle now because this bishop on a3 is just a monster. There's nothing to oppose it. And black's got to play knight to e7, which is what played in the game, just so they can castle. White took full advantage and played knight to e5, black castled, and white played f4. Now here the computer gives me a very interesting move for black to play. Maybe he even played b5. After bishop takes e7, queen takes e7, bishop takes b5. Remember, this a pawn is still pinned. The point is black wants to play knight to e4, and if bishop d3, they want to play f6 and kick this knight out of e5. If knight c4, knight takes c3 and queen c2. After this variation, this is a computer variation by the way, bishop takes, d takes and knight b6. Rook b8 takes and rook takes and queen takes. This is an example of what not to do really as white. We don't really want to swap pieces off because we get into this endgame where we're actually still a pawn down. And it's going to be very hard for now white to defend this. So even though those were all computer moves, I don't recommend swapping many pieces off. Rook e8 was played by black in the game, so defending this e7 knight, maybe preparing moves like queen takes c3. So rook f3 is played by white, and this defends this pawn, because if the queen captures we can play bishop takes h7 with check and pick up the queen afterwards. So rook f3 is a very strong move. Knight e4 is played in the game, so again ganging up on this c3 pawn. But white plays another strong move, rook h3, and the point is that black can't capture this pawn. If knight takes c3, there's queen h5, hitting the h7 pawn and f7 pawn. That's undefendable. The same goes with the queen. If queen takes c3, white will just play bishop takes e4 and x-ray the queen on c3. So black plays a defensive move. They play knight to g6, trying to blunt this bishop on d3. But white just takes this knight off on e4, the pawn captures, and now this rook is defending the c3 pawn. But this is not what the main idea was about. It was about playing queen h5, attacking this h7 pawn. h6 is now forced. It's the only defensive move that black can play. Just note quickly that the knight on g6 hits this f4 pawn. In the game they did play rook f1 to defend, and black played bishop to d7. But now white's going in for the kill. There are two really strong moves that white can play. One of them is knight takes f7. If the king takes an f7, white can play rook to g3 and pick up the knight on g6. King g8 is considered the best move, but then queen takes g6, threatening mate on g7. Bishop b5 to defend g7 with the queen, and also hit the rook on f1. But whites can come up with a cheeky move like bishop to d6, and black can't take this off due to queen takes g7 mate. So queen f7 is the strongest move, and white can just play queen takes h6, and if bishop takes f1, play the strong bishop to e5, and now we've got three pieces hitting this g7 pawn. And the endgame will probably continue rook to e7, and bishop takes g7, threatening mate on h8. So then queen takes, rook takes g7, rook takes g7, queen takes e6 check, king h8, and just king takes f1. And we're into a one endgame for white. But that wasn't the strongest move, so white does end up in a winning position. However, they played a much stronger move, knight to g4. And the point is that now knight takes h6 is a massive threat. And this bishop on a3 does an amazing job of keeping this king on g8 hemmed in. So the point is now black played knight takes f4. But now, believe it or not, there's a mate in 8 for white. Maybe just pause the video a second and analyse this yourself and see if you can see it. But if not, white now played the amazing move knight takes h6 with check. G takes h6 was played, and now rook to g3 from white. If the king moves, it's going to be mate, so knight g6 has to be played, and white now just captured on g6 with check. The pawn recaptures, but then the queen comes in, queen takes g6. And after king h8, white just played rook f7, and queen h7 is checkmate in the next move, and it's game over for black. So again, the wing gambit demonstrates the powerful kingside attack. All started from this bishop takes e4 move, after d takes and then plays queen h5. And quite frankly, black's position looks terrible from then on. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this game, and I'll be with you with several more games of the wing gambit very soon. This truly is a filthy opening, and I do recommend that you play it, and I'll see you in the next video. See you later.